Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sashnee Moodley. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss political violence. Hi, Professor.
Hi.
In your column, apart from raising questions about the principle of non-violence, you relate non-use of violence to universality. Why is this?
Yeah, I wanted to introduce the question of universality of human rights because it's a common word in human rights discourse, the universal human rights, that the rights are meant to apply to all. When South Africa wanted the ANC unbanned, they didn't thereby mean that freedom of organization would apply only to the ANC. It was meant to remedy a situation where the right to operate politically was not universally applicable. Now the same goes for violence. It's not right to hit anyone. It's not justified to use force against an individual merely because they belong to one or other political orientation or organization, as happened when the EFF went into Tembisa and hostile dwellers killed 2 of their workers. The other day when the EFF went in there again, you had the police actually saying to the EFF they should withdraw. But the EFF was saying, we have got a right to go in here without violence being perpetrated against us. And you, the police, must protect us against this. So I'm wanting to stress more generally, not just in relation to violence, but more generally, the question of rights being universal. As the South African Human Rights Commission said the other day on Refugee Day, people who are refugees in this country have all the rights in the Constitution except the vote. And I think what people don't understand is when they attack foreigners, when they attack other political parties, they're actually spitting on a constitution which people died to have to free this country.
You also relate the readiness to use violence to a macho culture in South Africa. Is this really a significant factor?
Well, you know, connecting violence and masculinities, violence and gender, is proven by historical studies and sociological studies all over the world. All over the world, violence is committed mainly by men. And South Africa has a particular history which makes, it's a history of violence, of conquest, and of resistance, which makes people very ready to use violence. But I relate it to a macho culture because you have to ask yourself, what are the models that are being advanced of male heroes in this country and in other countries? And the models that are advanced of the rough, tough people being people who should be admired. Now, when I was at school as a young boy, I was not able to play rugby because I had a leg injury. And I used to go to the doctor every year. And I really wanted to play rugby because that's what men do, you know. And if you're on the way to becoming a man and you can't play rugby, you're sort of a sissy, you know. So I used to go to the doctor and the doctor would say no, and I'd cry when I got home, you see, because I really wanted to be a rugby player more than a scholar, more than, I didn't think of being a freedom fighter, but I didn't value scholarship as much. In fact, the UCT rugby captain came to our school and he encouraged this idea by saying, studies are important, but rugby is the main thing. So that now rugby is a really rough, tough game. And I think it's made even more rough and tough because nowadays people just club people in rugby matches, things like that. And I think we've got to ask ourselves, what are we doing to combat this notion that the only way of being a real man is to be rough and tough and not gentle and concerned about other human beings. And when the president of the country repeatedly sings a song, Mshini Wam, which means bring me my machine gun, which was a war song, in a time of peace, you're valorizing wartime activities in a time of peace. Instead, what we must be doing is enunciating the importance of peace, enunciating the necessity that people understand that when you hit another person, when you kill another person, you are extinguishing the human qualities of that person. The struggle for freedom was a struggle for human beings to be free, to be human beings. Violence extinguishes that, and we have been very neglectful in building a culture of non-violence in this country. That doesn't mean pacifism, because there are some situations when you have to defend yourself. But once you have defended yourself, you must then return to non-violence, and we need to entrench that.
Are you not being utopian in calling for non-violence to be regarded as an unconditional good?
Well, you see, you've got to start small. It's just me. And whoever there's some pacifists who agree with me, but I'm not a pacifist. And what I think is important is that we look at our history, and we look at the way people resorted to violence. And the ANC history is a history where there are decades where they didn't use violence. They only took up arms when all other ways of pursuing the struggle against apartheid were cut out. They did this because the people who suffer are not really the soldiers who are armed. They're ordinary people who die in the so-called crossfire. So we've got to convince people that we need to learn to live together in peace and amity. And one of the ways that undermines this is if people resort to violence. People go to school, some don't, but we try to have them go to school so they have powers of reasoning. Even if they don't go to school, they have powers of reasoning. And we've got to convince people, whether in Tshwane, KwaZulu-Natal, or in pubs, that if they have disagreements, they must sort them out. And also in marriages and in relationships, they must sort them out by discussion, not by fists or other weapons.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about political violence.